Madam President.
Democratic is recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor this morning on an issue that is topical. It is an issue that within the last several days has become a national centerpiece of conversation. It reflects a decision by the Supreme Court just a few days ago that rejected President Trump's efforts to repeal deportation protections for dreamers, young immigrants who came to the United States as children. In an opinion by Chief Justice John Roberts, the court held that the President's decision to rescind DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, was, quote, arbitrary and capricious. It was 10 years ago that I joined with Republican Senator Dick Lugar of Indiana on a bipartisan basis to call on President Obama, begging him to use his legal authority to protect dreamers from deportation. President Obama responded by creating the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as DACA. It provides temporary, 2 years at a time, protection from deportation for dreamers if they register with the government, pay a substantial fee, and pass criminal and national security background checks. More than 800,000 dreamers came forward and received DACA protection. DACA unleashed the full potential of these dreamers who are contributing to our nation in a variety of ways, as soldiers, as teachers, as nurses, as small business owners. More than 200,000 DACA recipients are currently, quote, essential critical infrastructure workers, end of quote. That's not my term. It's the way President Trump's Department of Homeland Security describes the work of these DACA recipients now. 200,000 of them essential critical infrastructure workers. And among those, 41,700 DACA recipients in the healthcare industry. This includes doctors, intensive care nurses, paramedics, and respiratory therapists. They are the healthcare heroes we salute, and at the same time, they are the DACA recipients this president loathes. On September 5th, 2017, President Trump repealed DACA. Hundreds of thousands of dreamers faced losing their work permits and facing deportation to countries many of them barely remember, if they remember at all. Well, thankfully, the Supreme Court stepped in and rejected the strategy by President Trump. And what was the president's reaction? To no surprise, the president responded by attacking the court and threatening to try to repeal DACA even again in the closing months of his first term. Congress must step in immediately. After that Supreme Court decision, President Trump tweeted, quote, I've wanted to take care of DACA recipients better than the do-nothing Democrats, but for 2 years they refused to negotiate. Well, here's the reality, Mr. President. You've rejected numerous bipartisan proposals to deal with DACA and the Dreamers. May I be specific? February 15th, 2018, the Senate considered bipartisan legislation offered by Republican Senator Mike Rounds and Independent Senator Angus King, a bipartisan measure. The bill, which included a path to citizenship for Dreamers, supported by a bipartisan majority of the Senate. Why did it fail to reach 60 votes? Because President Trump openly opposed it. That's why. He said, I've got a better idea. On the same day that the Senate voted the president's immigration proposal, we found his so-called better idea failed by a bipartisan supermajority of 39 to 60. On June 4th, 2019, the House of Representatives passed H.R. 6. June 4th, 2019, more than a year ago. H.R. 6, the Dream and Promise Act, is legislation that would give Dreamers a path to citizenship, and it passed the House with a strong bipartisan vote. The Dream and Promise Act has been pending in the Senate for more than a year. I've come to the floor day after day and heard the Republican leader, Senator McConnell, bemoaning the fact that we are so busy here in the Senate and the House just isn't doing their work. The House has sent some 400 pieces of legislation to Senator McConnell's desk, 90% of it bipartisan, and he refuses to consider it, refuses to bring it to this empty Senate floor so that we can do our work. And one of those measures, sadly, is the Dream and Promise Act, the bill which would solve at least part of the immigration challenge we now face in America. Last week, I sent a letter signed by all 47 Democratic senators calling on Senator McConnell to immediately schedule a vote after the Supreme Court decision. As of today, the senator has not replied. Over the years, I've decided that the only way to tell the story of the Dreamers and the story of DACA is to introduce them here in the Senate. I've asked them to come forward if they wish, to provide me with a photograph and let me tell their stories. This is the 124th story that I'm going to tell. It's the story of a remarkable young woman named Cynthia Ramirez. Cynthia Ramirez came to the United States from Mexico at the age of 4. She grew up in Nashville, Tennessee. She wrote me a letter, and here's what she said about growing up. Moving to the United States gave me the gift of education. I learned English by the first grade, and that's when I learned that I loved school and I loved learning. Well, in high school, Cynthia was on the track team and a student council representative and a great student. She graduated at the top of her high school class with the highest honors. Cynthia went to Lipscomb University, a private Christian college in Nashville. She graduated with a nursing degree, and today, thanks to DACA, Cynthia works as a cardiac registered nurse at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, the largest hospital in Nashville, Tennessee. Cynthia is on the front lines of the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's what she says about this experience. Quote, I'm a very spiritual person, and I pray a lot. I remind myself that this is the job that I was meant to have. If the time comes for patients to die and they cannot have their families with them, we have to be there for them. Cynthia's greatest fear? Bringing the coronavirus home to her family when she comes home after her nursing shift at the hospital. Here's what she says. I take every precaution before entering the house. I take off my clothes, clean my phone, go straight to the shower. The rest is in the hands of God. I want to thank Cynthia Ramirez, a DACA recipient, for her service. She is an immigrant health care hero. She is a DACA health care hero. She is putting herself and her family at risk to save the lives of others. She also should not have to wake up every morning in fear that actions taken by the Trump administration will lead to her being deported back to a country she can barely, if at all, remember. This is an example, a classic example of this debate and what it's about. To think that we have, in a year, not even taken up this issue that was sent to us by the House, while it winds its way through our judicial process, all the way to the highest court in the land, where the ruling was in favor of Cynthia and the DACA recipients who have this protection. And in that year, did we step forward in the United States Senate, the so-called greatest deliberative body on earth, to even debate the bill that passed the House of Representatives? No. No, there was no time for that. As you can see, we are so busy here on the floor of the United States Senate. There's so much more that we could do here. And shouldn't we start with the highest priority, protecting Americans in the midst of this pandemic? This woman, Cynthia Ramirez, undocumented, protected by DACA, risks her life every single day because of this pandemic. Can we risk ourselves politically for a minute in the Senate and actually take up a measure that could have a direct impact on the lives of the 800,000 DACA recipients and the thousands of others who could have applied for that protection during the months that we've debated this in court? Sadly, we've been unable to do that. And it's all because of a decision being made by the President of the United States and by the Republican Majority Leader. It's a decision which needs to be addressed directly. In a few moments, I'm going to offer a unanimous consent request when it comes to moving this bill that was sent over by the House of Representatives more than a year ago. I'm really going to call the bluff of this president who says, why doesn't Congress act? Why don't you come up with a bipartisan proposal? Well, Mr. President, here's our chance. Here's an opportunity. We have a bill that's been sitting here for a year that would address Cynthia Ramirez's future and the future of thousands of others. And the question is whether or not the members on the other side of the aisle, the Republican side of the aisle, will at least let us address this issue now. Will give us an opportunity to bring before the United States Senate a measure which is no surprise and nothing revolutionary and new. It's a measure that we've considered in various forms over the last 20 years. But it's a measure that would address this issue and do it in a thoughtful way. This is an opportunity which we should seize. Wouldn't it be remarkable, maybe a headliner, if the Senate actually did something? If we actually took an issue of the day that affected real people, real lives in the middle of this coronavirus epidemic and actually decided that this young woman and thousands like her are worth the effort, I think America would be shocked that this United States Senate responded that way. And don't tell me we have better things to do. I'm all for doing the military authorization bill. We can get that done, be back in 2 weeks, and take this up immediately. We know the bill's here. We know that the bill is prepared and covers the areas that would protect this young lady and so many others and give them a future in the United States of America. At this point, it is really up to us. Now, there may be an objection when I make this unanimous consent request. Listen carefully to the objection. It has nothing to do with resolving the issue before us, the issue of the future of this young woman and thousands of others just like her. But we're in a position at this moment where we have to act. I'm awaiting the arrival of a Republican member who is, I hope, on the way. And so at this point, I'm going to suspend, Madam President, and yield the floor with the hopes that we can return to another colleague coming to the floor momentarily. So I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
The Democratic leader is
I
recognized.
want to join my colleague, Senator Durbin, in urging our Republican friends to... We in a quorum? Sorry. I ask unanimous consent the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
I am here to urge my colleagues on the Republican side not to object. Follow last night's example and allow this simple, humane, and good for our economy amendment to go forward. First, I want to salute Senator Durbin. There has been no voice of any elected official that I know who has had a stronger, longer, and more passionate defense of the DACA kids, many of whom are now adults. And he has pricked the conscience of the nation so that now the DACA kids and their families are really, by most Americans, respected, and by many Americans, just loved. I'm one of those in the latter category. I love these kids and their families. I've watched them on the front lines during the COVID crisis in New York risk their lives, even though they're not allowed to be full Americans, to help. And now we have an opportunity here to simply say, stop harassing them, let them do their jobs, let them live their lives, let them be with their families here in America so that they can help us in our economy recover from COVID as they've been doing without looking over their shoulder and worrying about being deported or having one of their family members being deported every 5 minutes. It's such an important amendment. It's so good for the country. The idea that immigrants are bad for America, that DACA kids are bad for America, is a regressive, nativist, and often bigoted idea that some use for political purposes. But nothing could be further from the truth. So I urge my colleagues not to object to Senator Durbin's fine amendment to help America live up to its ideals and its dreams. That lady in the harbor, in the city in which I live, give me your poor, your tired, your huddled masses yearning to be free. That's been part of the American fabric for centuries. This is a chance to bring us back to that fabric, that wonderful fabric that has been so good for our country for those centuries. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The Democratic whip.
Madam President, I want to thank my colleague and friend, Senator Schumer. We've been fighting this battle for a long time, Senator. The 8 of us who came together, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans, put together a comprehensive immigration reform bill which should have passed 7 or 8 years ago. 68 votes on the floor of the United States Senate. It was a bipartisan measure which we joined with Senator McCain to put together and bring to the floor. I thank you for your heartfelt comments. I'm going to speak a little longer and make the unanimous consent request. This measure that I'm asking for unanimous consent on, the American Dream and Promise Act, was introduced by Representative Lucille Roybal Allard, Democrat of California, on March 12, 2019, with 202 original co-sponsors. It would provide Dreamers, temporary protected status holders, and individuals with deferred enforcement departure with protection from deportation and an opportunity to obtain permanent legal status in the United States if they meet certain requirements. It passed the House of Representatives 237 to 187. 7 Republicans joined the 230 Democrats who were present to support the legislation. Protections in the American Dream and Promise Act would allow nearly 700,000 DACA recipients, as well as another 1.6 million eligible Dreamers brought to the U.S. as children, to stay in our country legally. The bill's protections would also allow over 300,000 temporary protected status holders and 3,600 individuals that I described earlier with the same opportunity. It would create a conditional permanent resident status valid for up to 10 years that would protect Dreamers, including DACA, from deportation and allow them to work legally in the United States. Cynthia Ramirez could continue working as a nurse long after this pandemic is gone. To qualify for this, the Dreamers would need to meet requirements. They must have come to the United States before the age of 18. She came at the age of 4 and continuously lived here for at least 4 years. They must demonstrate that they've been admitted to an institution of higher education, earned a high school diploma or the equivalent, or currently in the process of doing that. She's a graduate of Lipscomb University with a degree in nursing. They must pass government and background security checks, submit biometric and biographic data, demonstrate good character with no felonies, misdemeanor offenses of domestic violence, or multiple misdemeanor convictions, and they must register for the Selective Service if applicable. She's already met all those standards by the examination she's been put through for DACA, and of course pay their application fee. DACA recipients and other DACA-eligible Dreamers who still meet the requirements needed to obtain DACA would automatically qualify for conditional permanent resident status. When the President ended DACA in September of 2017, we stopped accepting applications from those who were eligible. Now, these young people would have their chance if they meet the requirements and the test that is required of them. They must complete one of 3 tracks, graduate from college or university, or complete at least 2 years of a bachelor's or higher degree program in the U.S., complete at least 2 years of honorable military service, and have worked for a period totaling at least 3 years while having valid employment authorization, maintain continuous residence in the country, demonstrate an ability to read, write, and speak English, understand American history, principles, and form of government. It's a high standard, but it's one that they're prepared to meet, and they should meet, to become part of America's future. How important are they? Well, they're extremely important in every single state. We know that there are some 780,000 DACA recipients across the United States. There are 109,000 of them in the state of Texas. 109,000. The average age of arrival for them is 7. They came here as kids. Their annual tax contributions are in the millions. I could read the numbers. In the state of Texas, there are 30,000 of these DACA recipients who have been characterized by the Trump administration as essential workers, 30,000 of them. 4,300 healthcare workers, DACA healthcare workers in the state of Texas. The state of Texas, Arizona, California, Florida, and others are going through a resurgence of infection and death from this pandemic. These DACA young people, many of them are on the front line fighting this disease, as Cynthia Ramirez is in Tennessee. The notion that we want them to leave now, 4,300 leave Texas now, healthcare workers, it's unimaginable. It makes no sense. It's time for us to do something. At a minimum, for goodness sakes, in this empty chamber, can we come together and debate this issue? The President has challenged us to do it. Let's do it. Not be afraid of it. Put it through an amendment process on the floor. I've lived through that before. It actually would resemble the United States Senate, which many people remember from the history books, where people actually came to deliberate and vote on amendments. That's all we're asking for. Bring this under unanimous consent to the floor. Let's do it. The President has challenged us. I'm going to make a unanimous consent request. I see the senator from Texas is on the floor here, and I want to make sure I get the right copy. Here it is. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Calendar 112 H.R. 6, the American Dream and Promise Act. Further, the bill be considered read a third time and passed. Motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
The senator from Texas is recognized.
reserving the right to object. You know, someone watching this at home might think that congressional Democrats, Senate Democrats, want to actually enact amnesty for the so-called DACA recipients. Of course, they could have done so earlier. President Trump offered Senate Democrats a deal that would have granted permanent amnesty for all the DACA recipients, and the Democrats turned it down. They didn't want the deal. They hoped instead to have an issue in November. You know, we're right now at a time of crisis in our country. We've got a global pandemic, and we have 44 million Americans out of work. This is, on the economic side, the greatest crisis our country has seen since the Great Depression. And yet, what we're seeing in the Senate is a continuation of something we've seen for several years, which is that today's Democratic Party doesn't value working men and women, American working men and women. Last week we saw a decision from the Supreme Court of the United States on amnesty. It was a particularly disgraceful opinion. Unfortunately, it was authored by Chief Justice Roberts. It was joined by the 4 liberals. And it concerned President Obama's illegal amnesty. DACA, when it was issued, was illegal. And actually, for years, President Obama admitted that. When activists asked him, will you decree amnesty unilaterally as an executive, he told them over and over again, I can't do that. I'm bound by federal immigration laws. I am not a king. I am not an emperor. That's what President Obama said repeatedly. But then as the election approached, I guess they reassessed and decided that being a king or emperor sounded pretty good. And so DACA, the day it was issued, was directly contrary to law. Federal immigration law says in the statute books that if you're here illegally, it's illegal for you to stay, to get work permits, and the Obama administration ignored federal immigration law and simply printed what were called work authorizations. My friend from Illinois has a picture of a lovely young lady that he's spoken about. What he doesn't have a picture of is what happened after executive amnesty was granted for those who came illegally as kids, which is that the number of unaccompanied children skyrocketed. The state of Texas, I've been down to the border many, many times. I've visited with the Border Patrol many, many times. You know, you go online and you see cages with children in them. What many of the people online don't tell you is it was the Barack Obama administration that built those cages. And it was executive amnesty that resulted in tens of thousands of little boys and little girls being sent alone with violent drug traffickers, with coyotes. Far too many of those kids were physically assaulted, sexually assaulted. You are not helping children by incentivizing little boys and little girls being in the hands of violent traffickers. That's not humane, and I've seen child after child after child abused by this system, and every time the Democrats offer more amnesty, the predictable result is more children are going to get physically assaulted, sexually assaulted. Amnesty's wrong, and it's also the wrong priority. Today's Democratic Party, their priority is on people here illegally and not on American workers, not on keeping American workers safe. What we should be doing, and in just a moment, I'm going to ask unanimous consent for this body to take up and pass Kate's Law. I'm the author of Kate's Law in the Senate. Kate's Law is common sense legislation named for Kate Steinle, beautiful young woman in California who was murdered on a California pier by an illegal immigrant who had come into this country illegally over and over and over again. He had multiple violent criminal convictions over and over and over again, but our revolving door system kept letting him out. As Kate Steinle died on that California pier, her father held his daughter in his arms, and her last words were, "Daddy, please help me." I've had the opportunity to visit with Kate Steinle's family. What happened to her was wrong. It shouldn't happen. And the reason it happens is because our broken system keeps letting go violent, criminal, illegal aliens. What does Kate's Law provide? Common sense legislation that says aggravated felons, people with serious felony convictions who repeatedly enter the country illegally, face a mandatory minimum prison sentence. In other words, we're not going to let them out and allow them to commit murders and rapes and assaults. Not going to let them out to abuse and threaten children. Kate's Law is overwhelmingly bipartisan common sense. If you go into the great state of Illinois and ask the voters of Illinois, does Kate's Law make sense? Overwhelmingly, they say yes. That's true in every state in the country. By the way, it's true of voters who aren't just Republicans. It's true of Democrats. It's true of independents. It's true of everyone except the 47 elected Democrats in this chamber and their colleagues in the House of Representatives. Because the reason Kate's Law is not the law is because every time I've tried to bring it up, the Democrats have objected. If Kate's Law had been on the books, Kate Steinle would still be alive. Because the violent criminal who kept coming in over and over and over again illegally would have been in jail instead of murdering that young woman. Amnesty is wrong. Illegal executive amnesty is wrong. And we need to have as our first priority protecting the American workers and keeping the American people safe. I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Democratic whip is recognized.
Madam President, it was my understanding that the senator from Texas was going to offer a counter consent. Is that correct?
Yes.
I think that was the moment to do it, but if
Madam President.
Senator from Texas.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Kate's Law, which is at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that the bill be considered read a third time and passed, and that the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table.
Is there objection?
Madam President, reserving the right to object.
The Democratic whip is recognized.
Madam President, listen carefully to what we just heard from the senator from Texas. First, he talked about amnesty. Amnesty, as I understand it, is a blanket forgiveness for the commission of a crime. Cynthia Ramirez has DACA. DACA protection that I've described to you for 2 years at a time. Brought here to the United States from Mexico at the age of 4, paid her fee, gone through her background check, and receives 2-year protections to continue in this country. According to the senator from Texas, that's amnesty for a crime, amnesty for a criminal. It's certainly not that. This young woman has been as open with our government as she could possibly be, and for it she's received 2 years at a time to build a life. And what a life she has built, undocumented, uncertain of her future, a person who is doomed by the Trump administration policy, finishes her medical education in nursing school at Lipscomb University, a Christian college in Nashville, works in one of the best hospitals in the whole region, saving people's lives who are facing COVID-19, and in the eyes of the senator from Texas, just another criminal looking for amnesty. Really? I'm sorry, but that doesn't add up. It doesn't add up at all. To say that today, because we are seeking help on DACA, Democrats do not value American workers, another statement made by the senator from Texas. May I remind the senator that all of the people we are talking about in the DACA program are currently in the United States, legally working because of DACA. It's not as if they're taking jobs away, coming into this country and displacing. Many of them, I'm sure, are unemployed because of the economy too. But they are here. She's doing work which most people would be afraid to do, to expose herself to the coronavirus every single day. You heard the routine she goes through when she comes home from work, taking off her clothing, rushing into a shower, washing off her cell phone, cleaning it before she faces her family. And this is a person who is a criminal. She's a criminal for what she does, Cynthia Ramirez. Really? I don't understand that thinking. To call the decision last week or the week before the Supreme Court is disgraceful is to say she should have no chance. She should be gone. What has she got to offer to the United States of America, to the state of Tennessee, to our future? Well, she has a lot to offer. And most Americans, even an overwhelming majority of Republicans, get that part of it. Now, the senator comes before us today with a consistent record on Dreamers. Every moment that he has been in the United States Senate, whenever he has been given a chance, whenever, to help the Dreamers or to help DACA, the junior senator from Tennessee has voted no. Time and time and time again. He's consistent. Bless you for your consistency. Today, he's not even offering an alternative that would give this young lady a chance. No. No alternative to the Dream and Promise Act. Instead, he offers his own bill, which has nothing whatsoever to do with DACA and the Dreamers. The CRUZ bill would increase penalties for immigration offenses. But anyone who commits any of the offenses which have been described by the senator from Texas is already ineligible under DACA. Ineligible. DACA requires applicants to clear criminal and national security background checks. Cynthia Ramirez has done that. To say that she's even close to committing a crime is an outrage. Let's be clear. The junior senator from Texas is in the majority in the United States Senate. If he were serious about advancing his bill, he could ask the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee to hold a committee vote on the bill. The senator from Texas serves on that committee. Then he could ask the majority leader to schedule a floor vote. But he hasn't done that. This bill that he brings to the floor today, he has not even introduced as a bill in this section of Congress. In this session of Congress, with the Republicans in the majority, the Immigration Subcommittee, chaired by the other senator from Texas, has held one hearing. The Senate Judiciary Committee has voted on one immigration bill. There has not been a single vote on an immigration bill on the floor of the United States Senate. Clearly, the senator from Texas has no intention of trying to advance his bill that he passionately defended on the floor. He's offering it today to try to muddy the waters and somehow tie this wonderful young nurse in Tennessee up with a horrible crime that was committed in California. She had nothing to do with it. There's nothing in her life that is even close to that crime. And to put that as the alternative to DACA and the DREAM Act is fundamentally and totally unfair. As long as I'm in this Senate, I'm going to come to the floor of the Senate to advocate for Cynthia Ramirez and all the Dreamers. What an American tragedy it would be to deport this brave and talented young nurse who's saving lives in the midst of this pandemic. America is better than that. We must ensure that Cynthia and hundreds of thousands of others in our essential workforce are not forced to stop working when we need them now more than ever. And we must give them the chance they desire to become citizens of the United States. Madam President, I object to the consent requested by the senator from Texas.
The objection is heard.